Mötet arrangeras av Irak Solidaritet, Folket i Bild, Stockholm och ABF. Vi samlas till protest mot 8 års ockupation och krigsbrott i Irak och i solidaritet med Iraks kämpande folk. Det sker i en tid av uppresningar för frihet och oberoende och ett drägligt liv i hela arabvärlden, inte minst i Irak. Vi hoppas att detta är ett hoppets ljus i tunneln, att befrielsen närmar sig och att krigsförbrytare ska ställas inför rätta. Media tiger som vanligt om det ockuperade Irak. Vi hoppas att detta blir ett bra möte och att fler engagerar sig för Iraks folk.
Folket i Bild är ju en av medarrangörorganisationerna idag. Folket i Bild är en partipolitiskt obunden organisation som egentligen arbetar efter 3 huvudsakliga paroller kan man säga. Anti-imperialism, för en folkets kultur och för yttrande- och tryckfrihet. Nu ska vi börja med att lyssna till Sabah Al-Mukhtar som är advokat från Irak. Nu boende i London tror jag och ordförande för Arab Lawyers Association. Sabah har varit verksam som advokat länge, både i Irak, Förenade Arabemiraten, utbildad i London och Bagdad bland annat. Och är en ofta citerad person i internationell media som CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC och så vidare. Och idag ska Sabah berätta om situationen i Irak och de krigsbrott som ockupationsmakten genomför där.
Sabah Al-Mukhtar. Warm welcome, Sabah Al-Mukhtar, to Stockholm.
I welcome you, Sabah, and please enter the stage.
Good afternoon. First of all, my apology for not being able to speak Swedish. I hope you don't mind me speaking in English. When I first came, I saw I was the only one wearing a tie and was going to take it off until 2 of my friends came wearing a tie, so I'm not going to take it off. I would like actually to start by saying that I would like to thank Folket Bild and ABF. I would like also to thank the members of the board of SIGYN Iraq Solidarity, as well as my friend SIGYN, who has been an instrumental person in motivating many of us, old and young. There is also Frank, and last but not least, Christer. I would also say that I am honored to be the only male speaker with 3 ladies. Aside from SIGYN, we're going to hear Lana and Marianne, and this is a privilege not many men have. I had the pleasure of meeting Christer last night and had dinner with him and we talked. But I think probably I should raise the question, why are we talking about Iraq? You know, there is the Japanese problem there. We have the nuclear reactor which is exploding in Japan. We have Colonel Gaddafi who's killing his people. We have just had a revolution in Syria, hopefully Syria, in Egypt and in Tunis. So why is everybody trying to talk about Iraq at this time? The question is, we're talking about Iraq because there is a crime that is continuing. Many people seem to think that the war in Iraq finished. You know, many years ago there was a war and people got killed and they killed others, and now there is no more war. And there is democracy in Iraq, and the Americans who were there are going to leave. And if we listen to the news, other than in Sweden, because Iraq doesn't appear in the news in Sweden, but whenever there is news about Iraq in the Western media, it is usually saying how good the situation in Iraq is. I would like to tell you that it's really, in fact, to go back again to what we're talking about, is why are we talking about Iraq in the present time? Because of all these disasters we have. We have the tsunami, we have the uprising, we have the Arab Revolution. And I tell you, as an Arab, I feel extremely pleased that before I die, I saw the Arabs eventually rise up and have a revolt. Because many people say, why are the Arabs not rising up? Well, we have. But still, why are we talking about Iraq under all these circumstances? My reason, I think, is that, first of all, there is a continuing crime. Secondly, that there is a situation which makes every one of us responsible to say something about it or to act. Because if we see a crime being committed and we don't say anything, we become accomplices. You don't need it? Okay. We become accomplices. I will try and deal with, I've got 30 minutes to speak, so I will try and deal with the issues that I want to speak on 4 different levels. I'll speak about the first level, the international and humanitarian and legal side. I will talk on the second level, which is the Iraqi side. The third level is, I would like to at least share some thoughts of what I think is the Swedish level. And fourthly, I would like just to touch on the aspect of business and economy. So if we start with the humanitarian and legal level, as I was saying, there is, if somebody is walking in the street and you see somebody kills somebody, either by driving or shoot him or whatever, and you just walk and go home without reporting it, without telling the police, without trying to do something about it, I promise you, after a week, you will not be able to sleep because you will feel very guilty because you have become an accomplice to a crime. Now, maybe you can't stop a crime, but you can at least do something about it. In this instance, we have the situation in Iraq, and I will address it a little further down when I talk about the Iraqi level. There is a crime which is being committed there, and it is continuing to happen. And for any one of us to say, well, you know, I'm really very busy with the tsunami in Japan, or because I'm busy with something else, I think we are doing probably the same thing by walking away from a scene of crime. Crimes in law, both domestic and international, must be dealt with by calling the people to book. Those people who perpetrate a crime must have a fair trial, and if they were found to be guilty, they must be punished. We have a situation in Iraq where many of us know or think there are a lot of people who have committed crimes who have not been asked to answer for their crimes. No one is being put on trial. No one is being penalized. We have the people here in Sweden all went out in demonstrations against the war, and indeed in other places in Europe and in the States, because people know that that is wrong. People know that this cannot be right. The United Nations Secretary General himself, Kofi Annan, after 18 months, said that the war was illegal. Of course, one would say, why did this man keep quiet for 18 months? Did he not know there is a crime? Or did he know and he didn't say? Could Bush and Blair just stay there? They go traveling. Blair is now, he is in charge of the so-called Middle East peace process. which is an irony which I don't understand. I've tried to bring up the subject with our politicians, with our MPs, with the governments in Britain, but we have the same problem as you have here in Sweden. Political parties play with each other games. So in order to do a favor here, you don't talk about something. But at the end of the day, we have at least 2 leaders who on their watch, the crime happened. So they are responsible for these crimes. But nobody is asking them for anything. Everybody is trying to get Omar al-Bashir to answer for crimes which are taking place, but nobody has identified them. But this is how the idea that we should be calling for justice, we should be calling for the law to be applied if we are to save the world from disasters. The United Nations Charter, it begins in the first charter, in the first article, by saying, we, the people of the world, having gone through the scourges of war, we don't want any more wars. Yet we have leaders, and I have to be very frank with you, Swedish government is just as responsible. Of course, it did not send the same number of troops, but what it has done, it has given the legitimacy to an illegitimate act. Because at that time, the Americans and Bush were saying, this is not an American war. Look at all the world is with us. And they named the countries. And one of them is Sweden. So there is a responsibility on everybody in that respect. If I look at just to remind you very quickly about the way it was done, the war on Iraq. In theory, Iraq had a dictatorship, and in theory, the world wanted to help the Iraqis to get rid of the dictatorships. So what did they do? They invaded the country. Now, this is the result of which something like 1.5 million Iraqis were killed. This is just like if there is an aeroplane with 270 passengers on board, and the hijacker takes the plane, and all what the government does is shoot the plane and kill everybody on board. And you say, why did you kill those people? You say, well, the important thing is that we got rid of the hijacker. Now, on the basis that Saddam Hussein was a hijacker, this is the analogy. But I would like also to leave the thought with you that Saddam Hussein had much more with Iraq than all the troops that came, whether they are from Syria or America or Britain or any other country. He was a national of that country. People can disagree with all sorts of things, but he had more right than anybody else. But the world community went to Iraq, created all these mythical statements which are not true. All the concepts have been put upside down. So there is something, everybody talks about the liberation of Iraq. If you look at any dictionary, whether it's in Swedish or other language, it will tell you liberation is when the people of a country get rid of occupier. What we have in Iraq is that we send Americans and British and others and Saudis and Syrians and etc. to go to liberate Iraq. How can you do that? It's an opposite concept. You have the second one, they talk about democracy. Now, democracy is the rule of the majority. But the majority must be the people of the country, not outsiders. So how can outsiders bring in democracy into a country? Democracy is something for the people, from the people. The degree of destruction that the Americans wreaked on Iraq during the operation of the war, and in that situation, they destroyed all the infrastructure of Iraq. They've destroyed the electricity, the water, the sewage, the bridges, schools, hospitals, homes, shelters, civilian shelters. There is Al-Amriya shelter. It's a shelter which had, because the Iraqis didn't have enough shelters, they decided that only women and children who are younger than 14, if they are males, to go into the shelter. Those people who went into the shelter were all boiled to death, every single one of them. And this is a civilian shelter. The Geneva Convention is a convention which the world has put on how you conduct wars. Wars are something bad, but there are still some rules. Some of the rules says you don't kill civilians. You don't destroy the requirement of life, whether it's silos for grain or sewage pipes or bridges or roads or any of these things. You cannot do that. They were all trampled all over. The conduct of killing soldiers, you cannot use weapons which are banned internationally. On Iraq, something like 30 tons of depleted uranium were used. And it was used in other places as well. So they have literally obliterated the country. Then they went into second stage. And that is to impose, to import, to appoint agents, an Iraqi government. Now, again, if you look at any dictionary about people who help a foreign country or a foreign army who is fighting his country. So if a Swede of Sweden is being invaded by Britain, and if a Swede supports the British, then there is only one definition for it, and that's treason. This person is a traitor by any standard, whether he's an Israeli supporting the Arabs, or whether he's an Englishman supporting the Russians during the Cold War, or anybody else. Iraq had, the Americans brought into Iraq hundreds and probably a few thousand Iraqis who were bought by the West, who have absolutely no care about Iraq, to form the governments in Iraq. I've touched quite a bit on the second idea, which is the level of the Iraqi scene. The weapons which were used on Iraq, they were all banned by international law. The way that prisoners were buried alive, I have footage, and many people have. Soldiers were buried alive, and this is contrary to the rules of war. All kinds of banned weapons were used on Iraq at that time. Then, as if that is not enough, Iraq was imposed under a blockade for 10 years. The blockade which was imposed on Iraq, it's called the sanctions. It was done by United Nations resolutions, which the United Nations says, we the people of the world. So in fact, what we are being told, that whatever has been done in Iraq has been done in your name and his name and my name and everybody's name. Because those people are talking on our behalf. That's on the international scene, let alone on the domestic scene. Our parliaments, our ministers, ministers of foreign affairs, prime ministers, and the rest of the politicians in the domestic scene. They're really, and we're talking about democracies. We in Britain, we cannot say we, the British, are not responsible. It's the responsibility of Tony Blair. That's not correct. Every one of us, because we have voted the government, and because we have given them the mandate, and we have given them the authority to act in our name, so whatever they do is approved by us, and it makes us all partners in that crime, if it is a crime. Situation now in Iraq, after the sanctions, then came the invasion of 2003. And in 2003, the Americans said that they will apply what's called shock and awe policy. My family who were living there, one of them tells me when the bombing was taking place and far away from them, the mere sound and the explosions makes their heart within their body shiver. So it really shakes the human being to the core. Now, there was no need for that. Iraq should not have been invaded because there was no reason for the invasion. We all know all the stories about Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. We all know about the 11 September and the role of Iraq in that one. We all know about the weapons of mass destruction. We reached the point where, in fact, the UN says unless they go to the bedroom of the head of the state, then this is violation of international law. I've discussed once with one of the chief weapons inspectors, his name is David Kay. David Kay, I saw him at the initial stages when they were doing the inspections in Iraq. There was, maybe not many people will remember, there was at one time or another what's called a standoff between the inspectors and the Iraqi civilians in front of the Ministry of Agriculture, because David Kay and his staff were stopping the employees leaving unless they search them. And they had ladies with their handbag, they have to be inspected. So I asked David Kay, being a nuclear scientist, is he trying to tell me that a lady can go out of the office with a nuclear reactor in her bag? What was he looking for? They moved it from a weapons inspection into a criminal investigation which is aimed at insulting the individual. My youngest sister, she's a professor in the university. She was teaching her students for postgraduate work on physics. She said, my student, and she feels about her students, she feels they are her children. And she said, they used to make me cry because my children work for 6 months doing their work on their program to do their research for the master's or for the PhD. And there comes the inspectors and they look at it and they say, this program cannot continue, you have to change. 6 months of the life of this young person is gone down the drain. They have to do something else. She can't even understand why they were doing it, because they were students. They were doing academic research. Then we had a government in Iraq, which is called democratic, called whatever. This government is unable to get out of what's called the green zone. This is a government where the members of parliament, you know, members of parliament are people who represent the people. Each one of them has an allowance of 30 bodyguards, because an MP, a member of parliament, can't talk to the people without bodyguards because they'll kill him, or so he says, or whatever. The salaries that a member of parliament in Iraq now he gets is higher than the salary of the Speaker of the American Congress. And I'm sure it's going to be the same thing for your members of parliament. I don't know how much you hate them or like them, but I'm sure they get less than what the Iraqis are getting. This is a country where it is at the bottom of the list of Transparency International. This is an organization which looks at the corruption in all the countries. So every single country is listed there. I think your country is among the top ones. I don't know, maybe it's 6th or 7th or something. But the bottom of the list, the last country on the list, is Somalia. Above that one is Myanmar. And above that is Iraq. There is another international organization which produces what's called a failed state list. Again, it takes every country in the world and they look at various objective testing. health and security and safety and jobs and variety of factors, but it's an objective testing which is applied to all countries of the world. Iraq is literally the last one. It is a failed state, 100%. This country, we are told that there's no need to talk anything against them because they have had elections. I tell you, the elections in the best of places could be fiddled, could be tampered with, could be, I mean, even the, not the last election in the USA, the one before, they tampered with it that they had to go to the federal court to decide who's the winner. You can imagine what happens in a country like Iraq, where they're trying to have an election where you don't know who you are electing. So you have a choice of something like 600 people. Every few hundred of them come under a list. You don't know any of them, but you know Maliki and you know Alawi and you know 10 names, and you vote for the names, and in theory all those people, you have voted for them. There is no particular requirement for who can vote. And because of the corruption in Iraq, and I have tried it with one of the American journalists who thought that this was an exaggeration, I made him send me by email his photograph, his signature, and $600, and I got him an Iraqi passport. He has his name, his signature on it, a different name, gave him an Iraqi name, and he has the passport. This man can sign and can elect. Now, in Iraq, there are at least 50 members of parliament who have forged documents. There are ministers who have forged documents. There are members in parliament who are Iranians by birth, origin, allegiance, and everything else. Iraq was a secular state, but we thought it was a Qaeda state. So we converted it into a theocratic state. Now you look at the pictures of the parliament, the Iraqi parliament, you have more people with turban than even in the Iranian parliament. And some of them are Iranians. Then you have the Iraqis reaching the stage where they began to choose between who is the lesser evil. So in the last election, most of the people had to choose principally between two persons who came with the Americans, both of them. That's Maliki and Alawi. Alawi, when he was prime minister a while back, when the Americans brought him in, he said that he has ordered the Americans to destroy Al-Fallujah to get rid of Al-Qaeda. Of course, he didn't order them, but he had to say that. And he is the one who said he ordered the Americans to destroy Karbala to get rid of Al-Qaeda. So this man, he has, and I'm not making any accusations, every statement I'm making could be verified by all sorts of means. Alawi has given an interview. He was asked specifically a few years back that you are accused of working for the CIA. And he said, that is wrong, because I don't work only for the CIA. I work for 13 intelligence services. He lived to regret it, because now if anybody wants to really annoy him, remind him of that. And the Iraqis have reached the point where they actually, some of them thought, in order just to get rid of Maliki, we'll vote for Alawi. They voted for Alawi. Alawi won by 2 or 3 votes or whatever. But Maliki said, it doesn't matter if he won and by this, I'm not going to leave. So he stayed the prime minister. At the same time, the United States of America and the United Nations are having a problem in Haiti, because exactly the same position happened there, but in that case they are supporting the one who has won. and they are imposing sanctions on Haiti. That shows how much we can play with all these policies. I think I'll move quickly to the Swedish level. On the Swedish level, I think, again, I will look at it on two levels within the Swedish one. There is on the domestic level, which I would like to raise some questions with you more than anything else, because I don't know very much about Sweden. But there is the so-called Kurdish issue in Sweden, because there is a huge Kurdish community in Sweden. A lot of them, or the Kurdish movement, has been linked to the left, to the socialists, to the variety of, because everybody was fighting dictatorship, whether it's Nazism or Iraqism or Baathism or whatever other name. And by the way, this is one of the great big misconceptions in the West, especially in Europe, because the Europeans have something in their mind called Nazism. So they think any nationalist movement is Nazism. But in fact, this doesn't apply to Baathism. I'm not here to talk about the Baath Party, but the Baathism is a nationalist, pan-Arab nationalist movement. And it is supported by a lot of people who are not members of the Baath Party, because the ideals are, it says that all these countries who speak the same language, have the same history, etc., should be one country. And I think, quite frankly, there is more between the Arab countries than we have in Europe here. But nevertheless, in the West, there is this idea of, so the socialist or the leftist or the communist or the left in Sweden, because of its association with the Kurdish movement at the time, does not seem to have got out of this. If you want to actually examine the reality of it, you can ask your Kurdish friends or colleagues whether they support the Americans or not. Because in fact, they played the role of the horse of Troy for the Americans. At the present moment, it's a separatist movement. At the present moment, they have a problem with the government. At the present moment, they have a problem within Kurdistan. But there is, whenever it comes to the position here in Sweden, if you discuss Iraq, you find all my brothers, the Kurds, will say how great Iraq is. If you talk to them about Kurdistan, it's even better. If you try and find out what's their position on America, you will get to know really where people's affinity lies. I am concerned with the corruption that is there, not only in Iraq as a whole, but with the Kurdish region in particular. Your neighbors here to the north, the Norwegians, probably some of you have heard about the oil deals between the Norwegians and the Kurds and the Americans and what have you. And it's all very, very corrupt. Many people, I'm absolutely in favor of people having the right of and freedom to believe and to speak and to act. But there must be, the rest of us must be able to actually understand whether people are saying things for their own ulterior motives or for basic ones. But I'm totally opposed to policies of repatriation of asylum seekers, whether they are coming from East Europe or Kurdistan or Iraq or Africa, because there are international rules which deals with that one. Sometimes in Sweden, when you want to address the questions about Iraq, you begin to address the question of the Christians, the minorities in Iraq. Well, first of all, I would like to remind you that humanity is humanity. It doesn't matter whether they are Christians or Jews or Muslims or Hindus or whatever. Secondly, the Christians in Iraq pre-2003 were treated equally, just like anybody else. They had their shares of unfair treatment, just like the Muslims did, and they had their share in the benefits. The vice president of Iraq was Tariq Aziz. He's one of the famous people who is still languishing in prison for no apparent reason. He was tried, the last trial he had, and he's a Christian, don't forget. The last trial he had is that he was one of the people who used to tell the imams in the mosques what to say and what not to say, and to praise Saddam Hussein and be against the Americans, which is, it's a little bit difficult to swallow. But the reality of the situation is this: if we keep at the rate we're going, there will be no Christians left in the Middle East. There will be no Christians left in Palestine. There will be no Christians left in Iraq. There will be no Christians left in the rest of the countries. Because of this idea that if we here in the Christian West say that the Christians are being abused and what have you, instead of helping them, we effectively open the door for them. First of all, we tell them they are abused, even if they are not. But I'm saying in Iraq they are. And secondly, if we open the door for them to come rather than the others, there will come the time that there will be no Christians in that country. And Iraq without Christians is not the Iraq I know, because that is the land of Abraham. And the Christians are an integral part of the Iraqi composition. So it is not only the Christians who need help, but the rest of the people. On the foreign policy of Sweden, because I think I've taken more time than I need to, I just want to remind you that there is an uprising in Iraq. In case you didn't know, it's not only in Libya and Tunis and Egypt, but there is a real uprising in Iraq. And people are being killed, journalists are being killed, people are disappearing, people are being imprisoned, tortured. Some of them are well known and others are not. On the human rights situation, I think Sweden, on its foreign policy, it has a role that it can play in the United Nations. Your Minister of Foreign Affairs, Carl Bildt, said that they will support what's called a special rapporteur for Iraq. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, when you have a crisis country, the United Nations appoint rapporteurs for a variety of issues, like the disappearance, the torture, like the killing of academics, like disappearances, but they have a special rapporteur to report on the situation, which is bad. And the situation in Iraq is this: there are human rights abuses taking place everywhere in the world. But in Iraq, every human right of every Iraqi is being abused every day. And that's a situation with no equal. And I think it requires for a support for a special rapporteur, and I think Sweden, which carries weight in the international community, should be able to back up this proposal. In the last meeting in the Human Rights Council, it's only the Russian ambassador who suggested that. Swedish ambassador was quiet. He congratulated the Iraqi government on its improvement of human rights records. Finally, I refer on you hear people, everybody, it's in the national interest. If I was a Swede and if my government doesn't look after the national interest of Sweden, I will not keep them there. I will not vote for them. I'll kick them out. So every government has to look after the national interest. But you can do it in one of two ways. You can do it in the immoral, imperial way, where the Britain, where I come from, and the French and the American have done it. You go and exploit everything to make profit. And there is a little more moral way of doing it. All the talk about this, golden honey and in Iraq that is open for you because you are supporting the government is just simply not true. Thank you for your time.